Light a campfire and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
On this podcast, I was joined by Jonathan Braack and Jack Alexander. We spoke in depth about the rebuild and redesign of andBeyond Grumeti, all the exciting new sustainability aspects, and some of the challenges one may encounter when building a lodge in the wilderness.
Jack, Jono, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this afternoon. We're really excited to chat to you guys all about the Grumeti rebuild, the design aspects, and the sustainability aspects of the new Grumeti Serengeti River Lodge.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, thanks for having us on.
So, Jack, my first question is for you. Can you describe the brief for the rebuild of Grumeti, and where did you turn to for inspiration when you first received this assignment?
So I think there's a lot of different inspirations for the lodge. Obviously, it was an existing lodge. It's not a completely greenfield site, and it is very much a rebuild, but a very, very extensive rebuild. We really have almost just about started again. And I think primarily the key inspiration is the site itself. The location in the Western Serengeti is truly unique. It's a very, very remote site. It's an incredibly beautiful place, and it's an incredibly wild place, actually. I didn't quite realize how wild it was until we first went out there. But our inspiration for the architecture really came from just standing on the site of the former lodge, looking out across the river, standing in the shade of those trees, and really trying to find a way of creating or recreating the beautiful aspects of the former lodge, whilst still sticking to the footprints of the previous buildings, but really playing to the strengths and the beauty of the site itself and that really remote, wild location. And then when it came to the broader, sort of more metaphoric inspiration, we used the Maasai beaded necklace as a key driver particularly for the main guest areas of the lodge. And what we wanted to do was combine all the various aspects of a authentic Western corridor guest experience in that main guest area and arrange them along that bow, that curve. That we've done at the main guest area. Wow,
it's lovely to get that insight into your inspiration. And you, Jono, Jack has mentioned that it was almost a full rebuild. And I was wondering, what is andBeyond's policy regarding sustainability when it comes to rebuilds and to new lodge construction?
Yeah, so rebuilds provide an opportunity to really maximize, inputting the sustainability infrastructure. It's also sometimes a little bit cheaper to do it than to retrofit the sustainability infrastructure. And then also what a rebuild allows for is that obviously we work with Jack and the design team to reduce our footprint as much as possible. So therefore, reduce our electricity consumption and our water consumption. And that's exactly what we did on Grumeti, where we will be achieving about 80% renewable energy. We are still in the process of finishing off our water saving initiative, but we will be also maximizing that soon, where we recycle all our grey water for reuse at the lodge.
80% renewable energy, that's really impressive for a lodge out in the wilderness. How exactly are you achieving that 80% renewable energy usage?
So when I refer to the energy, that's the energy that the lodge consumes. Obviously, we're not talking about game drive, vehicles, fuel for vehicles. So we achieve it by firstly reducing our energy consumption, as I said, and then we've installed a solar system, an off-grid solar system, which comprises of a photovoltaic component and a battery component. And those two components will provide, hopefully a minimum of 80% of the electrical energy and the heating energy required for the lodge. And then they are backed up by a diesel generator, which will supply the rest of the 20% in a worst case scenario.
Jack, now that we've heard a little bit about the sustainability elements that'll be in place at the new Grumeti. What are some of the challenges that one might encounter when trying to balance sustainability and luxury together?
Well, I think, for us, I don't think those ideas are inherently conflicted. Maybe in the past there were, but for us as designers and in today's market of luxury lodges, there isn't actually an inherent difference between creating a sustainable lodge and creating a luxurious lodge. I don't think it's a luxurious guest experience to visit a lodge or a remote, extraordinary place like the Western Corridor where Grumeti is, that isn't being cared for or that isn't being sustained. So I think those used to be very contradictory ideas maybe at one point, but for us as designers, we see luxury and sustainability as being inherently connected. I think, of course, it's a bit easier said than done when it comes to the budget. The biggest limitation we have is still, the costs involved with things, particularly really sophisticated sustainability technologies. And it's a space in which things are very rapidly improving, as I'm sure Jono will attest to. That there's always a kind of better battery system or a newer water recycling system or something that's just arrived on the market in America. But we are of course constrained by the budgets in which we work. And I think one of the challenges that we face is being able to integrate those or let's say offset the expenses of some of those really sophisticated systems. But I think it's by working together with Jono and of course with andBeyond, where the role of sustainability is really part of the company's DNA, that we don't have to do any convincing. We know from the outset that we want to create a luxurious, sustainable lodge, and that those two ideas are tied together.
Yeah, I really love your sentiment that sustainability and sort of natural luxury are no longer, opposites in this world. I mean, Jono, would you kind of agree with that? And would you say that you no longer have to make choices to sacrifice on luxury if you also need to be sustainable? And I mean, what kind of choices are you making to ensure that we get the best of both worlds in this kind of lodge?
Yeah, no, exactly. So as Jack said, the new technology out there allows you to do so much more. And obviously we ensure that we don't compromise the guest experience. But with like as Jack said, with the new products available, etc., it's just a question of what you can afford within the budget. And in the case of Grumeti, we made it work. I mean, we're hitting 80% plus renewable energy and a significant reduction in water consumption without affecting the guest experience.
Fantastic. My next question is to you again, Jack. I wanted to ask about how the remote and rugged nature of destinations where you build might influence your choices around sustainability. You've mentioned that some technology may be readily available in other parts of the world, but how readily available is that technology to operate in these kinds of conditions and produce the sustainability results you're looking for?
Thanks, Josh. I think these are good questions. These are, and for us, they're the difficult questions that we grapple with from the outset of these projects. I think we have a responsibility to still craft beautiful, handmade, contextually relevant buildings, and buildings that are handmade, predominantly from natural materials, are inherently sustainable and are inherently renewable. And I think that's something that guests will see and experience when they travel to the new Grumeti Lodge. I think, for us, the buildings and the construction materials are only considered sustainable if they are renewable, if they provide sufficient longevity, and if we can justify their use in offsetting the cost of harvesting them or transporting them to site. And our challenge in these very remote lodge sites like Grumeti, which is an exceptionally remote place, is tied to the distances and to the logistics of getting those materials and technologies to site. I mean, the carbon footprint of shipping materials from North America or Europe or even South Africa has to be considered in justifying those materials and those technologies in the design of the building. And again, that's why using local materials and local methods is our starting point, and definitely our preferred approach. There's some beautiful examples of low-tech buildings, handcrafted, contextual, locally made buildings throughout Africa that don't incorporate any sophisticated technologies but are inherently sustainable because they're made and remade almost on a seasonal basis. So for us, it's a combination of the fancy technologies, the kind of latest sophisticated solar or water recycling systems, but also working as much as possible with local materials, with local building techniques. And I think it's important also to say that there's economic sustainability in these projects, and that by employing local artisans and local craftspeople and local construction company to build the lodge, that has an economic sustainability in a broader sense, not just what is the lodge made out of itself.
And Jono, were there any specific elements relating to sustainability that you were looking to improve over on the old Grumeti Lodge?
Yes. So the old Grumeti Lodge had no renewable component. It was energy inefficient and to a certain extent water inefficient too. So those were our main focal points, which I think we've achieved quite well now.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And Jack was mentioning earlier about sort of local procurement, local building companies. In an extremely remote destination such as the Western Corridor, it can be really challenging to source these kinds of goods that we might use at a lodge like Grumeti. So what was it like procuring these goods locally, and how does andBeyond sort of plan to offset the impacts of bringing in some of the goods used to build the lodge?
When designing a system like this, obviously the first point to consider is when you select your equipment, A, where it comes from, but B, more importantly, is how is it maintained and who's going to maintain it. A lot of the specialist renewable equipment comes from Europe, so you have to make sure that you can maintain it. So we used the closest company that we could find for the solar installation, and who's going to maintain our solar system installation is a company based in Nairobi, Kenya, which is not that far away. And then the offsetting of the impact. So we are currently, as we speak, we are busy working on a project where we're going to offset all our direct carbon footprint. And then at a later stage, we will be setting up a process where we will be offset our indirect carbon footprint. So hopefully in the long term, we will be able to offset that impact.
And very interesting. And could you go a little bit into what those projects might be?
So the first step is obviously we are finalizing for this year because it's the end of our financial year. So every year we calculate our direct carbon footprint. And then at the moment, we are trying to establish which mechanism we would use to offset that, which carbon project we would select to offset that footprint.
Going back to the sustainable elements at Grumeti Serengeti River Lodge itself, Jack, I wanted to ask you, were there any specific elements that you used in the rebuild which would help reduce the lodge's impact on the environment?
I think almost every material we used in comparison to the former lodge certainly was selected with an intention to reduce the lodge's carbon footprint. Maybe one of the more contentious ones that I wanted to talk about is the fact that the lodge is built out of light gauge steel, or what's sometimes called cold formed steel. which can be argued is not a natural material. But I think our reasoning and our rationale in selecting that building method and that construction material is that firstly it uses a fraction of the energy required to form traditional hot rolled steel sections, and that secondly it's designed to last a lot longer than a timber structure, which is predominantly what the old lodge was built from. That was a kind of combination of heavy concrete footprints and a timber framework which supported a canvas tent. And we do and have worked with timber in the past, but it generally requires us treating the timber with poisons or putting poison rods into the ground to make sure that the timber isn't eaten by termites. And in that way, what might seem like not a natural material with the light gauge steel, actually, when you look at the broader kind of context of that carbon footprint and the longevity of the steel frames, and the fact that steel ultimately can be recycled, means that it is a sustainable material, and it is a sustainable approach to the whole design. And I think as John has also alluded to, we don't make these kinds of design decisions in isolation. What we're trying to do is offset the total carbon footprint of an entire project. And so you're always looking at one decision in the context of all the others. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite materials and one of the most beautiful is the banana fiber ceilings at Grumeti, and that was a cue we took from the old lodge. It's a really beautiful natural material to work with, and again, it creates that contrast to something like fabricated steel, that it's locally sourced, it's renewable, it creates jobs for local artisans, and the guys who install it and put those beautiful ceilings together, it really is like a kind of art. It's really a local technique that's, I think, been perfected by those local artisans over quite a few years. It's not totally unique to Grumeti. As I said, it was the banana fiber was used in the previous lodge. If guests visits Ngoro Crater on the same circuit, they'll see similar ceilings there. But it really is a bit of a signature for the Tanzanian circuit, and really something quite beautiful.
And out of interest, what is the longevity of that banana fiber? Is it also treated with something to make it last longer?
What we try to do is ensure that it's applied to a sealed backing. So, and this is getting quite technical and a bit but specific. But we close off the roofs completely to ensure that bugs and bats can't live inside any of the cavities, and that ensures that the banana fiber lasts much longer. It's when it's exposed to rain and when it's exposed to insects and animals, that's when it starts to fall apart quite quickly. But yeah, it's a natural material, so it does weather and it does need to be replaced, but we try and give it the right structural backing to make sure that it lasts as long as possible.
And Jono, my next question is to you. We've spoken at length already about the different ways that you have improved sustainability at Grumeti, but I wanted to ask, are there any other examples of local procurement and local business employment that you can speak to? And also, is there anything unique being done to ensure a more sustainable waste disposal at Grumeti?
Yes. So we'll start with waste. So at the moment, all Grumeti waste, or all Grumeti dry waste, so all plastic, tin, glass, etc., goes to a recycling centre and is all recycled. And then just from other sustainability impact perspective, so we are working on a project where we are assessing our local procurement for each lodge and looking at how we maximize our local procurement, specifically with Grumeti being the focus point of that. And then just to get back to just what Jack alluded to earlier, also just to when we were talking about concrete and steel, the choice of steel was a good one because the steel is considerably more environmentally friendly and has a much lower inherent carbon footprint than concrete does. And we reduced the amount of concrete at the lodge. I forget the amount, Jack, but it was significant. It was really significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only a little bit of concrete in some of the footings and foundations. And it's important to remember that Grumeti does sit right on the banks of the river, and there are drainage lines into the river. So we didn't want the buildings to wash away. And there were kind of structural challenges in that regard. But we've certainly, compared to the old footprints, I would estimate like a 95% reduction in the amount of concrete that we used.
Wow, that's impressive. And to me, it's so interesting. You speak about the old Grumeti, which had concrete as well as then supported tents, versus a lodge that has now been rebuilt. And so often people would probably think that tents with a concrete base are far less impactful on the environment, but it's actually not the case.
It's easy to look at a tent on the surface of it and say, oh, well, that's a very light footprint. That's clearly sustainable. Like I said earlier, a big part of sustainability is longevity, and not having to redo it again and again and again. It's not only the footprint on the ground that the guest sees when they arrive at the lodge, but the footprint that lodge has in its manufacture, from start to finish, on and off site. So what can be seemingly sustainable or renewable on the surface isn't always the case. And I think that's the key thing with Grumeti, that all the decisions about the design and fabrication of that lodge have been made within a greater contextual desire to be off-grid, to be sustainable, and wherever we can to offset the carbon footprint of the lodge entirely.
And Jono, my next question is to you again. You mentioned that Grumeti has some really impressive plans for water recycling as well. Can you go a little bit more into that?
So in the back of house area, the bulk of the grey water, and that's mostly the laundry, goes through a system that treats it to a level where we can use it to wash cars. And there's actually quite a lot of water is used just in washing cars and washing equipment. And then, so that's in place. And then soon we'll be installing a system in each guest room called a hydroloop, which is similar to what we used at Sossusvlei. And that recycles the grey water from the room to actually quite a very clean level. And that will be used to top up the pools and to wash decks, etc. Just to wash the outside of the lodge, of the rooms. And it's actually, I know it doesn't sound like much, but when you do the numbers, it's actually quite a significant amount of water that we save.
Of course, I'm sure that once you actually look at the details and the numbers, it is a real payoff. And sort of continuing on from that, Jono, have there been any learnings from the rebuild at Grumeti that you will take forward into future andBeyond lodge rebuilds and sustainability evaluations?
Yeah, watch out for the rain. There were some serious challenges with flooding rivers and storms, etc. But no, not really. I mean, we've done this a few times now. No real new learnings. We'll see how the system runs and we'll tweak it. And if there are any issues, we'll learn from that. But touch wood, for now, it seems to be fine.
And you mentioned storms and flowing rivers. Are there, besides those challenges, are there any other challenges to building lodges in very remote places?
Yeah, also just getting the equipment there safely, because some of it is quite sensitive and very expensive. But yeah, those about the only. It's the logistical issues. Obviously, some of the equipment, you procure in Nairobi, so it's import into Tanzania, export out of Nairobi, those kind of issues. But nothing insurmountable, no.
And my last question is to both of you, but Jono, I'll ask you first. Is there anything in particular that you're proud of having introduced or resolved during the rebuild of Grumeti?
No, I think the one thing to be proud of is that we really reduced the energy load significantly. I mean, the system we installed, the solar system, is an 83 kilowatt system, which is small, and that produces 80+% of the energy. To give you an example, at one of our islands that we're busy working on now, which is a similar sized lodge, actually got 2 rooms more, but that's the next lodge where we're going to be rebuilding and initiating the sustainability projects. Its current load is 230 kilowatts. So, I mean, it's nearly 3 times bigger than what we've achieved to do at Grumeti.
Wow.
So, it's a huge drop in consumption.
Yeah, that's incredibly impressive. I think it's lovely to hear the energy savings and water savings that are projected to come out of Grumeti. Jack, same question to you. Is there anything from a design perspective that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, I think, well, I'm proud of what Jono just said. I think before he gave that answer, what I was going to say was that I'm particularly sort of proud that we could create a lodge that had so much more to offer from a guest experience perspective. You know, the spaces are much bigger, they're far more luxurious, they're open, they're light, the natural light in the rooms now is exquisite. We've added baths, which we never had before. We've added swimming pools, which we never had before. And we managed to do that all on the same footprint, more or less, but very closely sticking to the old footprint, just by being far more rigorous and efficient in the way that we approach the design. And I think, it's testament to all the people that worked on it, and all the creative energy from a variety of different fronts that we got to this point that Jono says. We're offering now a beautiful, luxurious guest experience with a fraction of the energy requirement that you would traditionally have at a lodge of this caliber.
Wow, thank you. It's really fantastic to hear, and I think all the elements that you've both spoken into are really important things and things to be proud of when it comes to the refurbishments or rebuilding of luxury lodges. So thank you so much to you, Jack, and to you, Jono, for joining me on the podcast this afternoon. That was some really interesting stuff that you both spoke about. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Great. Thanks for having us. And thanks to andBeyond for involving us in the project. It's been a fantastic experience.
Thank you for listening to Leave Our World a Better Place. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about andBeyond, please log on to our website at andbeyond.com.